Hello and welcome to a look at Budokan, the Martial Spirit, for the Amiga, a game that was released by Electronic Arts. For reference, I am just going to have the gameplay running in the background and then do some commentary on top of that. It may not line up with the gameplay, but I hope you will tolerate that. There's no plot in this game, which is a bit of a shame because I like digging holes in plots. But there is an objective. You take on the role of a young martial arts student who wants to enter the Budokan tournament. And in order to do that, he has access to 4 martial arts styles that he can practice. Well, it's not so much the character that needs to practice, it is definitely the player who needs to practice. And the different styles are karate, nunchaku, bow, and kendo, which of course is sword fighting, but because no one can be bothered cleaning up the mess after chopping up students, the sharp blades are replaced by wooden swords. It can still be quite painful to get hit by the way. Once you enter a dojo of your choosing, you have 2 different training options. You have the option to train or practice by yourself, which is very useful to get a feel for the different moves and the flow of the different moves. Then you can enter kumite or sparring with an instructor, and you have 3 choices of challenge level you want to face, and you can probably gather by yourself that they are likely divided into easy, medium, and difficult. Due to clever or perhaps some people will find it annoying game design, you can't really afford to skimp on any of the martial arts styles because once you enter the tournament, you will be required to make use of all of them at one point or another. But we will get to that once we start covering gameplay. Let's do technical side of things because, yeah, graphically it definitely seems to have appropriately Oriental theme to it, which is like a good idea because this is in essence a game set in Japan, and the graphical style is very thematically appropriate and pleasant to look at. The different fighters, maybe not epically looking, but compared to many another game, the graphics of the different characters is actually very nice looking. What makes the graphics in this specific game somewhat special is the level of animation that is involved in the game. All the different fighting styles have multiple different moves, and of course, a joystick is normally limited to a certain set of moves. But what the designer decided to do was to make use of stances. In essence, you have a defensive stance, a combat stance, and an aggressive stance, and each stance unlocks several different moves that can only be used once you are in that particular stance, meaning that you have access to a lot more combat moves than you would have in most other martial arts inspired games. And the level of animation for each move is surprisingly high. Bear in mind, of course, that back then memory was a huge restriction, and not dropping games in the hands of players that were delivered on 25 floppy disks are usually of some importance. So for the resources that was available, the level of animation and the quality of the animation for the different fighting moves was actually surprisingly high. The sound side of things, the music, cues and pieces and jingles and all that stuff have a nice oriental tinge to them. They are perhaps a bit more upbeat than what you would necessarily associate with pure Oriental music, but it sounds believable enough and is very, very pleasant. And I fully enjoy all the music in this game. The sound effects are by and large very, very satisfying. The fighting moves, the ki or yells from the different fighters as they attack, the um, sound of blocking, the sound of connecting, the sound of all that stuff is very, very nice, and it is not overly done. There's some martial arts games that you can play where the hero is yelling so much that you think he's on bloody fire. The controls. The controls are a bit of an interesting thing because, as I was saying before, each style has 3 different stances that you can make use of, and that means that in order to complete a move, you have to be entering the stance that allows access to the move and then do whatever joystick actions you need to do to execute the move. And that is where you as a player can definitely tell that you are improving when going into stance and executing an attack becomes a fluid motion instead of a slight pause between entering the stance and then doing whatever attack or block that you need to do. And it is definitely initially wonky. It probably feels a bit daunting, and I wouldn't dare to say sluggish because it is actually surprisingly smooth. But it takes some time to get used to it and get a proper feel for it, and that is where the player skill definitely comes into play. The gameplay. Well, it is a martial arts game, but it's not a martial arts game as so many other martial arts games are. Ultimately, once you enter the tournament, it becomes a versus fighter game, but the designer wanted to try and capture the spirit of martial arts as much as the fighting. And while it would be somewhat daunting to try and translate such a thing to a game, I would say that the design side has certain level of success in portraying the spiritual side of martial arts. Looking at martial arts, it's very often easy to just look at the fighting and saying, well, it's a fighting style. But for a lot of people, martial arts is a way of living. It is not just about punching people in the face, it's about mental discipline, confidence, self awareness, not self centeredness. There's a difference between the two, and that kind of stuff. And in that regard, the way it has been translated into gameplay is by the use of the key meter. Some people think that key is very real, and some people think that it's a lot of baloney, and it is not up to me to tell what you should think about it. I have my opinion, which I will keep to myself. But in essence, you build up ki by not doing anything, which of course is a bit wonky in a fighting game, you can argue, but you can possibly imagine that the higher your level of ki, the more impact on your opponent's stamina your attacks will have. The stamina flow is dictated by your fighting and of course being hit by an opponent. And the way you can regain stamina is by not being hit or by blocking successfully. Blocking, not just blocking. If you just stand there blocking, you'll actually drain your stamina. And You can effectively, if you are skilled enough this game, turn a somewhat almost impossible situation into a winning situation because of the ability to regain stamina from blocking. But that is where I find the instructors in the community options not to be aggressive enough to actually teach you the art of blocking, which is an art that you need to make heavy use of in the tournament. In the tournament, you will face opponents which will use the martial arts styles that you have practiced, but you will also come up against opponents which will use martial arts styles which you haven't got access to. And it is up to you to decide which of the four martial arts styles you have available is best used to counter whatever opponent you are facing. But once you enter the tournament, you have the four different martial arts styles available, but you can only make use of any of the four times in total, meaning that if you have mastery in using the bow, you will likely be much better off saving that for the very tough opponents and trying to even out the use of the martial arts styles that you are not so good at and try to use them against opponents that you find less challenging, because you will have to use all four martial arts styles. And that is where perhaps a bit of a daunting aspect of the game comes in. There are four martial arts styles and they are not optional. You need some level of proficiency in all of them if you want to succeed in the tournament. When it comes to quirks and oddities in this game, there's thankfully not an awful lot of them. You may have gathered, if you've been paying attention to the video, that the hit detection can be a bit generous. In sparring, you could argue that that is perfectly acceptable because, of course, you are meaning to learn, not being beaten into a pulp. But in the tournament setting, it can feel a bit jarring. Until you get a feel for the flow of the different martial arts styles, you can easily feel overwhelmed when you have an opponent coming at you, guns blazing, and basically smacking you about. And the fact that you have to monitor your stamina, your opponent's stamina, and your key levels if you are able to, while also trying to inflict hits and avoid being hit yourself, it actually makes it quite a bit of a thinking man's martial arts game. It is not just your button mashing, spam one attack until your opponent keels over, because you will keel over way before your opponent is if you employ such tactics. And that is definitely a gameplay style that is not necessary for everyone. There's a certain level of rock, paper, scissors going on when it comes to the different martial arts styles, and I don't necessarily think the game benefits from it. You could argue, and you could reasonably argue, that if you are fighting against someone who is using karate and you are fighting him with a staff, that you would have a distinct advantage. And you would. But at the same time, if that karate practitioner was skilled enough, he would have the ability to deflect your attacks, leaving you vulnerable and closing the distance where your staff would no longer be an advantage for you. And that kind of gameplay is not present. And maybe I'm asking too much, but it would have been nice if such options were available in this game. The intention behind the game was to reflect the spiritual side as much as the martial arts side, and in that regard, I think the game overall generally succeeds. The pacing, the flow, the way of fighting is not going to be for everyone, but it is undeniably a high quality product. On that note, thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye for now.